The Toronto Maple Leafs are bickering amongst themselves. The Winnipeg Jets have lost their way, and the Nashville Predators just lost a heartbreaker in overtime. We've got all that and the biggest stories from around the league in the playoffs coming up next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen of the day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Leafs, David Morassutti. And David, not an easy time for the Leafs. What is the biggest reason this team is down 3-1 in this series right now?
Well, it's the same. In game one, the Sportsnet put out like going into commercial, a montage, and they played Same Old Song and Dance by Aerosmith, which was a huge dig at how this Leafs team was playing. And to me, that song kind of sums up this Leafs team. Every year, it's the same old song and dance. The stars just are not playing to their expectations. There's so many players that are kind of been under the microscope, and obviously this year it's Mitch Marner. He's one of the guys that's not leading the charge. You look at the Bruins stars, Pastrnak, Marchand especially. Marchand has more he's got 6 points in the series, which is what all the Leafs star players have combined, or roughly what they have combined.
Yeah, and how has the goaltending been so far? I mean, that's always sort of an issue in Toronto. Has it been better so far this year, or is it part of the problem as well?
Well, here's the thing, and I've talked to a lot of people. There's some people who are not happy with the goaltending. Like, the problem is when you got a Jeremy Swayman on the other side that's putting up numbers that, we haven't seen he's by far and away been the best goal in the playoffs. He hasn't allowed more than 2 goals in a game, in this series. So that puts so much pressure on Ilya Samsonov to be that much better. And unfortunately, that's a tough expectation on him. So I would say that Samson's not the reason why they're losing this series. But unlike last year, he's not stealing them any games. And to me, that's where you need your goal. He hasn't elevated his play from the regular season to the playoffs. He just hasn't. The timely saves aren't there. Like, he's allowing goals at tough periods, right? And I think it's just there's so much pressure because the Leafs are not scoring that, yeah, the goaltending hasn't been better than the Bruins goaltending, but when you only have less than 2 goals per game of support, how much can you expect the goaltending to really help you out?
We saw some bickering going on the bench in the last game. Talk to me about that. Is that just frustration boiling over, or do you think there is actually sort of a chemistry problem on this team?
Well, and it's funny because all the players are saying it's not frustration, but I don't know. When you see a Mitch Marner throwing gloves on the bench, as the broadcast said, he's back in Pee-wee hockey, I don't know what other word you could say to describe it. They're trying very hard to not say they're frustrated, but honestly, what they say and what their body language is showing are 2 different things. That's the first time I've ever really seen those 3 players kind of go bicker back and forth at each other. You hear William Nylander, and he says things that you can't obviously repeat live on air, but essentially I think it got to the point where the excuses have to stop. You can say all you need to say, complain about certain things not going right. It's the playoffs. Not everything is going to go your way. You just have to push through it. And I think that's kind of maybe where the frustration is that, you know what? the Bruins are playing a very frustrating style. They're limiting chances. It's not something it's something the Leafs have seen many times before. And Morgan Riley kind of thinks that there's no point in complaining about it unless it's going to motivate you to do better. And to me, that's, I think, where that sequence really got people's attention, because we hadn't really seen it. We hadn't really seen them express that in a lot of ways. So I said, I personally think that this is something that kind of needed to happen. They needed to have this kind of back and forth to say, you know what, we can complain all we want, but we just got to go out and do it.
What is this whole situation year after year, sort of your best players falling short in the playoffs? What does that say about the leadership of this team?
I think it shows that there's a huge lack of leadership. You know, when the Bruins lost game 2, who's the one that stepped up? Who's stepped up since then? Brad Marchand, their captain. We thought this Leafs team would not be able to handle, the Bruins would not be able to handle the loss of Patrice Bergeron. Such a big leader, big playoff time performer. He's gone. And that hasn't happened because they had this culture instilled with Bergeron that Pastrnak and Marchand have embodied. And to me, the Leafs culture brings it all down from this leadership group. And the leadership group is John Tavares, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, and Morgan Riley. As a group, they just haven't been able to do it. And is it all John Tavares' fault? No, but I don't think there has been enough. Clearly something is missing with this leadership group, that they haven't snuffed this out. This is not a one-time thing. This is over the years. And to me, that does speak to a problem within the room, that there's not an accountability within the players themselves. We don't know what they're saying in the room, but the reason why people perceive it that way is because look at what they've done on the ice. And since nothing has really changed, who's taking onus for this? John Tavares could come out and say that we haven't played well, but unless the players truly believe it, nothing's going to change.
So what will it take for this Maple Leafs team to get back into this series? I mean, you win one game and you know things could change dramatically. What will it take? What do they have to do better?
Well, there's also you got to get better offense here. You got to make the Leafs have done a really good job of pressuring the Bruins defense with the forecheck and getting to get pucks, retrieve pucks. Two issues I think are big apparent here. The Bruins had over 26 block shots in game 4. The Leafs had 5. Let's just show the discrepancy here. The Bruins are getting in the way of Leaf shots. The Leafs are not doing a good job of getting separation from the Bruins defenders. So I think that's the first and foremost. You got to do a better job of getting pucks on net. And then when you look at the power play, when you get opportunities, you got to cash. I'm not saying you got to go 100%, but going 0 over the last 2 games, they're at 7% in this series. That's historically bad. So I think this is finally the time that Sheldon Keefe has to make serious change on the power play. You got to move guys around. Get Tyler Bertuzzi off the power play because he's now become a main guy on the power play. That's just not going to work. You got to do a serious change here because it hasn't worked. It's been too much of this. And so I would say the power play needs to change. And honestly, I also think you have to look at offensively when you're looking at this line. Stop with the dump and chase. This team can't dump and chase the puck. That's not what they're built for. Game 2, what they did, if they didn't like what they saw, reload, get back, maintain possession. The Bruins will be happy if the Leafs dump and chase because they know they can snuff that out. So I think that's the big one there. The Leafs really need to focus on not doing the dump and chase, play to the identity because the identity hasn't really worked, but focus on keeping the puck more, be a puck pursuit all the way, but also don't give away possession. I think that's a big one for them.
Well, be interesting to see if they can pull that off. David, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @D_Morassutti. Go and follow the Locked On Leafs podcast, where we get your podcast from, especially on YouTube. We passed the 5,000 subscriber mark. So if you're a Leafs fan that wants to go out and win an Austin Matthews jersey, we're having a contest right now. It'll be ending at the end of round 1. Hopefully that doesn't mean after game 5, we're going to have to give that jersey away. We want to keep giving people opportunities to win that jersey. So make sure you go and check that out.
All right, David, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You could bet on everything from slam dunks to home runs to slap shots, and it's all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. Hockey fans, check out the latest odds for your favorite teams and players on the FanDuel app. And you can find lots of interesting and exciting things to bet on. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, Harrison Lee. And Harrison, I wish it was under better circumstances. Game 1, the Jets surprised some people, winning a high-scoring affair, and it's been difficult since then, dropping 3 straight. Why haven't we seen the Jets playing their style of hockey for most of this series?
Unfortunately, I think it's 2 things, right? I think the first is that the coaching staff really overthought this series rather than kind of follow the blueprint and template that they set up in their previous games against whether it was Colorado or Dallas. These are all really good teams in transition, and Winnipeg did a good job of denying a lot of those zone entries, disrupting their speed, slowing them down, and then Winnipeg was able to sort of keep it instead of like a full court, kind of keep it like a half-court press, which worked a lot better. But now Colorado has been able to just basically skate by us. I think their speed, their skill, and the coaching staff for the Jets, unfortunately, kind of getting lapped by Colorado. I think the Avs have just been able to really overmatch us to the point where the Jets were supposed to have a depth advantage, and instead, pretty much every Colorado Avs line has schooled the Jets. So it's a tough one, but technically fixable. But I'm having a hard time seeing it after these first 4 games.
You mentioned that the coaching staff is being out coached or maybe overthinking things. Are we, if this series ends quickly, are we looking at a possible coaching change, or do you think they're just going to say, stuff happens, we had a great season, and the staff will come back?
Given how last season ended and how some of the players were calling out the coaching staff in tonight's press conference, I would say there's definitely going to be a change. I think there was probably going to be a change anyways. I think Bones was always supposed to be sort of a temporary measure, maybe 1 or 2 years, and then you hand over the reins to what looks to be Scott Arniel. I don't know how I feel about that 100%. We've seen some glimpses with Arniel, and I feel like he's a little bit more progressive. I think he's got some decent ideas, but it's hard to really get a read on his full sample size. So either way, regardless of how deep the Jets go, I think because of all the stuff that's happened for Bones personally, whether it's his wife or his own health, and the fact that he's been around for a very long time, he's had an amazing career. I don't think that there's any shame if he was to consider maybe hanging it up and retiring after this year.
Talk to me about Connor Hellebuyck. I mean, one of the best goalies in the league, but hasn't had a great series. How much of the last 3 games, or even game 1, which was high scoring, how much of it is on Hellebuyck and how much of it is on the team in front of him?
I would say most of it's probably on the team in front of him. I mean, there's a couple of goals that he won't love, but generally speaking, the Jets' PK was just atrocious. They basically screened him, and you'd have Nichushkin or any other manner of players literally just free in front of Hellebuyck for a tip. And Makar's the kind of guy who will see those shooting lanes, and he basically has a free pass to the net. So for the PK, definitely on the Jets. At even strength, I think you'd like maybe one or two extra saves, but the Jets have just been so bad. I mean, they've spent so much time in their own end, and honestly, given how much the Jets are conceding in high danger chances and stuff, I think Hellebuyck has probably saved maybe one or two more than you might think. But I mean, his numbers aren't really that much worse than what an average goalie would be expected to give up. It's just been a horrendous series from the Jets, and I think a lot of us are probably hoping that it ends a little bit sooner.
As far as players, I mean, the old cliche in the playoffs, your best players have to be your best players. We've mentioned Connor Hellebuyck. Anyone else that you feel has just really struggled for the Jets in this series?
I think it'd actually be easier for me to say who hasn't struggled. I think everyone has just been pretty much bottom of the barrel. Morassutti, I would say, is one of the few exceptions. He's been great. Appleton had a solid game today. I mean, he wasn't able to really impact the scoreline, but I thought he had a fine enough game. Nemesnikov was doing okay before he got injured. Really, though, I mean, you're starting to really grasp for straws. I mean, Connor has probably been the most engaged that he's ever been on the top line, and, Scheifele and Velarde are doing some stuff out there, but, not much of it has really paid off, and I think that's kind of been one of the toughest things. The depth scoring is not really there either, so, the top six, it's kind of been coming upon them to be the standard bearers, and they really haven't looked anything the part at all this series.
What does this performance say about the leadership inside the locker room, the captain and sort of the players who are supposed to be leading the way?
So I think there's a couple of things there. I think, for one, I think players bought into this, to the way that Bones wanted the team to play, and it's clearly not working. So now they're like, oh, well, we need to make adjustments. The Avs made their adjustments. We haven't done anything, and it's, on the staff. But, effort-wise, I think they're trying as hard as they can. But, I mean, if this is the system that they wanted, it's hard to say that they really can complain about it. I mean, you're looking at a team that was built to be heavy and slower against a team that's lightning fast and has rapid passing. Unfortunately, you kind of get what you ask for. And I think that's the Jets in a nutshell, is that they've put themselves in a tough spot. And I think that there's definitely ways out of it, but I just don't know that it's going to happen this year.
You mentioned ways out of it. What do the Jets have to do to try to get back into this series?
I think the biggest thing is just pressuring Colorado. They've given them so much time and respect, and I think that's a mistake. Colorado's getting away with tons of little picks and stuff, and if they're not going to call that, do the same thing. If you're gonna let your opponents cheat, you might as well take advantage of the same loopholes and try and slow them, because that's the biggest problem they're facing right now. And also, play Cole Perfetti. I mean, it really shouldn't be rocket science. You have a 40-point player sitting in the press box. No other team in the playoffs is doing this. I mean, that's just like very common sense. And then I think the other thing that they need to do is put Colin Miller in on the back end. I appreciate the effort that Stanley goes through, but this series is absolutely not one that he was designed for. He cannot skate out of a corner, and the agility and stuff that he struggles with is exactly what the Avs feast upon.
Talk to me a little about special teams in this series.
Oh, so
sorry.
Yeah, I know. The power play looked okay in game one and didn't score, and ever since then it's just been pretty mediocre. A lot of the stuff that they've had trouble with whether it's setting up zone possession, making zone entries, I mean, just the basic stuff, it's looked bad, and it's been that way the whole year. So is it new? No. Is it frustrating? Yes. Unfortunately, every time Velarde goes off the ice, the power play suddenly dies with it. So when he was out from injury, power play was pretty awful. And you look at the talent on this team, and it should not be that bad. But, it is what it is. The PK, the less said about it, the better. I've probably spent a couple of years now talking about how bad it is. This year, though, like compared to last year, it was like average. This year, they've just completely nosedived. No pressure. There's just way too much time and space, and it's frustrating. I mean, you watch the same thing over and over again, and I don't understand how Arniel, who was handling this side of things, went from like a league average PK that looked halfway decent to one of the worst 5 units in the whole league.
Wow, that's a big drop off, and yet such a successful season point wise for the team. Looks like they're in big trouble right now in this series with Colorado. Harrison, Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
They can find me at HL Living Loco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. We're, of course, available under Locked On Winnipeg Jets on all of your favorite podcasting platforms, same as Locked On Today. So be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And as always, we really appreciate your support.
All right, Harrison, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks. Have a great one.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their lowest price guarantee. So Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. My favorite feature on Game Time, you go on the app and you could see the view from your seat before you purchase the tickets, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure your team can pull out a win, but that's when you dig deep. Lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball and charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb that leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free in the App Store or Google Play. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Predators, Ann Kimmel. And Ann, a tough loss for the Preds on Sunday. Looked like they had the game in their hands. What happened?
The Nashville Predators had this game in hand with about 57.5 minutes, played in this game. And then the Vancouver Canucks went 6-on-5 and Brock Besser happened. You need your big players to come up big, especially in the playoffs. And that's exactly what Vancouver got from Brock Besser, who tied the game up. And then Vancouver came out, won the game in overtime. And this was a game that Nashville had a lead 3-1. In this game, they really outplayed Vancouver for 57.5 minutes, but that doesn't win a hockey game. So the Predators find themselves down 3-1 in this series, and it's going to be a challenge to get back into it.
No question about that. I mean, what was the team doing so well for that first 57.5 minutes of the game? Because, what I saw, they looked pretty good.
It's been a really interesting series between these two teams. And this game, I think, was the most open that you've seen this series be. And Nashville really had more puck possession, I think, generated obviously more shots on goal than Vancouver did. And I think a lot of that had to do with just winning the small puck battles. And that was something that had been an emphasis as they got through games 2, games 3, like, look, we have to win these puck battles. And I feel like that's something that Nashville did very well. They had some extended offensive zone time, which is something that they didn't always have in this series in a couple of these games. So they really had this game pretty well under control. They were able to limit chances for players like JT Miller. Brock Besser did get on the score sheet early for the Vancouver Canucks, but really they had done such a great job to limit chances. UC Saros was playing really well in goal. And Andrew Burnett in the postgame just said, we had a couple of minutes where we had some defensive breakdowns in front of UC Saros, and we lost a little bit of our composure. And that's all it takes in playoff hockey to let a team in.
Little bit of controversy in this game. Talk to me about what happened and your take on it.
Yeah, so there was some question when the Nashville Predators got a goal. Philip Forsberg scored. It was one of those goals that went off the skate, and the officials ruled it a good goal and then went immediately to take a look at it. And I think Vancouver wanted to take a look at it too. I don't believe Vancouver could have challenged it anyway. There was some controversy about, was there a kicking motion? Was there not? If you look at it from a lot of angles, you would say, no, there was certainly not a kicking motion. There was one replay that we were able to see in arena that looked like maybe there was some, but it was a situation where Vancouver couldn't challenge. The officials felt like there wasn't enough to overturn the goal, and play moved on. But yeah, there was some question about that goal.
So the goal counts. We move on. I guess the big question from a Predator standpoint, emotionally, how do you overcome a very difficult loss like this one?
Yeah, this is a tough one. You know, Roman Josi in the locker room and post game was very upfront and said, you know what, this sucks. Gus Nyquist, this sucks. I mean, these are veterans who have seen it. They've been through it, And this was a tough one for the Nashville Predators, but they understand where they're at. And when you are in a playoff series, when you were down now in a playoff series 3-1, you just cannot stay there. And Nashville liked most of their game. They really felt like they had played their best game in this series. They liked what they were doing. They were having a lot of success. Asked Andrew Brunette about some of the younger players. Remember, Nashville's got some players that are just getting postseason experience, and what was his concern level about them kind of being able to turn the page as quickly as you need to. Brunette really felt like, look, these young players are just so hungry to get back out there. They almost have an easier time than the veterans who have gone through it before. Nashville is going to have a challenge, just sort of emotionally resetting. They're going to be on the plane, flying to Vancouver tomorrow, and they've got to get right back on the ice, and they've got to win. So this is going to be a real challenge of the maturity of this team and how much growth mentally that they have had over the course of the season. It's going to be tested right now.
It's also going to test the coaching staff. What do you think their approach is going to be?
Andrew Brunette really liked most of what he saw from the team. There were a couple of late defensive breakdowns in front of Juuse Saros. That's something that they will address. They did have to make some adjustments defensively. Spencer Stastny was not in the game due to an injury. Dante Fabro came in. That was his first game in quite a while. Roman Josi was out of this game for a chunk of time. He had an injury, had to get stitches to his ear. I think that Andrew Brunette will kind of look at those defensive pairings, make sure that he still likes that. That may be an area to kind of keep an eye on, but I don't know that they're going to change a lot about the game. They really liked how they played. They hated how it finished.
Talk to me about Juuse Saros and what he's meant to this team, both in this series and really all year round.
It's been such an interesting season for Juuse Saros. This is a Vezina caliber goaltender, but this has been statistically his worst season. He's really had a lot of ups and downs, but when Juuse Saros is good, he is very good. And he has been very reliable for the Nashville Predators in this series. And Andrew Brunette was very quick to speak up and say those two late goals were not on Saros. We have hung him out to dry defensively in those two late goals. So I think full confidence in Juuse Saros. I think Saros is going to be really important as this series wraps up, because again, you're facing really great offensive players like JT Miller, like Brock Besser. You've also got Quinn Hughes. So Saros really is going to be important.
All right. So what has to happen for the Nashville Predators to get back into this series, or at least bring it back? Let's start with baby steps. Bring it back to Nashville for Game 6.
I think it comes down to your best players have to be your best players. Yes, Philip Forsberg and Gus Nyquist got goals tonight, but that's the first we've really heard of Nyquist, O'Reilly, Philip Forsberg, and Roman Josi. Vancouver has done a fantastic job of really shutting down Nashville's best players. Those are the guys you need to have step up in this next game if they want to bring this series back to Nashville. You've got to get Philip Forsberg, Gus Nyquist, Ryan O'Reilly, and Roman Josi on the score sheet.
How about the depth scoring? Because I know that's been an issue all season long.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to watch the depth of battles in this series. Vancouver has a lot of talented depth players, and a lot of people felt like that's where Nashville was going to be most outmatched. But I think Nashville has felt pretty good about some of their depth players. Mark Jankowski, Luke Evangelista have all scored. I think that they've done a good job, especially in Sunday night's game. They did a really good job handling the pressure from Vancouver's depth. But they are going to need a little bit more of that. Some players like Tommy Novak, he's been very quiet in this series, and you need all of the players contributing, especially now. I mean, this is it. These are the games you absolutely have to win.
Yeah, win or go home now for the Nashville Predators. And why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
So you can find the podcast on your favorite audio podcasting platform. Just look for Locked On Predators. You can find us on YouTube under that same name. And of course, you can check out the podcast on social media at LO_Predators.
All right. And thanks so much, and good luck the rest of the way.
Thanks so much.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want to thank my guest, David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs. I want to thank Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets and Ann Kimmel of Locked On Predators for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, we are here every Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League so you can keep up to date with all things NHL. Stay safe. Have a great day, everyone. And thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.